What if I told you that every decision you make, from negotiating your salary to choosing where to sit in a meeting, is actually a strategic game where others are making moves based on what they think you'll do? What if the reason you're not getting the results you want isn't lack of effort, but lack of strategic thinking? In the next 20 minutes, you're about to discover the game theory principles that govern business, politics, and everyday life. The hidden rules that strategic thinkers use to consistently win, while everyone else wonders how they do it. This isn't about being manipulative. This is about understanding how the game is really played. Let's begin. Thinking Strategically by Avinash Dixit and Barry Nalebuff is the definitive guide to strategic thinking using game theory. This isn't an abstract academic textbook. It's a practical manual for understanding and winning the strategic games that surround you every day. Whether you're negotiating a business deal, competing for a promotion, making investment decisions, or even choosing what restaurant to go to with friends, you're playing strategic games where outcomes depend not just on your choices, but on others' choices too. Game theory is the mathematics of strategy, the formal study of how rational people make decisions when their outcomes depend on what others do. It was developed during World War II to understand military strategy and has since revolutionized economics, business, political science, and everyday decision-making. The authors have made this powerful framework accessible to anyone, showing how strategic thinking applies to real-world situations. The fundamental insight of strategic thinking is that you must think not just about what you want to do, but about what others will do in response to your actions, and what you should do in response to their anticipated responses. This is thinking ahead and reasoning backward, looking forward to figure out what will happen, then working backward to decide what to do now. Most people don't think this way. They make decisions based solely on their own preferences and immediate circumstances, then wonder why things don't work out as expected. Strategic thinkers see the world differently. They recognize that every situation involves multiple players with different interests and information, each making moves based on their understanding of the game. Victory doesn't go to the strongest or smartest necessarily, but to the one who understands the strategic structure best and positions themselves accordingly. This book teaches you to see these strategic structures and use them to your advantage. In this summary, we'll explore the core concepts of game theory, simultaneous versus sequential games, Nash equilibrium, credible threats and promises, strategic moves, bargaining, voting, and cooperation, and more. We'll see how these concepts apply to business competition, salary negotiation, auction bidding, political campaigns, and everyday social situations. By the end, you'll have a framework for thinking strategically about any situation where your success depends on understanding and anticipating others' moves. Let's dive into the world of strategic thinking. Simultaneous games and Nash equilibrium. Dixit and Nalebuff begin with simultaneous games, situations where players make decisions at the same time without knowing what others will choose. This describes many real-world scenarios. Companies setting prices without knowing competitors' prices, voters choosing candidates without knowing how others will vote, or auction bidders submitting sealed bids simultaneously. The most famous example of a simultaneous game is the prisoner's dilemma. Two criminals are arrested and interrogated separately. Each can either cooperate with their partner by staying silent, or betray them by confessing. If both stay silent, they each get 1 year in prison. If both confess, they each get 5 years. But if one confesses while the other stays silent, the confessor goes free, while the silent partner gets 10 years. The strategic dilemma. From each prisoner's perspective, confessing is the better choice, regardless of what the partner does. If your partner stays silent, confessing gets you freedom instead of 1 year. If your partner confesses, confessing gets you 5 years instead of 10. So, both prisoners rationally confess, even though they'd both be better off if both stayed silent. This is the tragedy of the prisoner's dilemma. Individual rationality leads to collectively bad outcomes. This pattern appears everywhere. Companies in price wars cut prices to gain market share, but all end up with lower profits. Countries in arms races spend on weapons to gain advantage, but all end up less secure. Students studying late into the night to beat the curve all end up exhausted with the same curve. Each acts rationally from their perspective, but all would be better off cooperating. The prisoner's dilemma illustrates Nash equilibrium, named after mathematician John Nash. A Nash equilibrium is a set of strategies where no player can improve their outcome by unilaterally changing their strategy. In the prisoner's dilemma, both confessing is the Nash equilibrium, because neither can do better by changing only their choice. If you're confessing and switch to silence, you get 10 years instead of 5. Worse. So, both stay stuck confessing, even though mutual silence would be better. Understanding Nash equilibrium helps you predict outcomes in strategic situations. You look for the point where everyone is playing their best response to what everyone else is doing, and no one has incentive to deviate. This isn't necessarily the best outcome for everyone. It's just stable because no one can improve by changing unilaterally. The authors show how Nash equilibrium applies to business. When Coca-Cola and Pepsi set advertising budgets, each tries to outspend the other to gain market share. But they end up in an advertising arms race, where both spend heavily and market shares remain roughly constant. A Nash equilibrium where neither can reduce spending without losing share, but both would be better off with lower spending. The key to escaping bad Nash equilibria is coordination and commitment. If prisoners could credibly commit to staying silent, they'd avoid the dilemma. If companies could credibly commit to moderate advertising, they'd avoid the arms race. The challenge is making commitments credible, which we'll explore later. Dixit and Nalebuff also explain mixed strategy equilibria, situations where the optimal strategy involves randomness. In a penalty kick, if the kicker always goes left, the goalkeeper will always dive left. If the goalkeeper always dives left, the kicker will always go right. The equilibrium is mixed strategies. The kicker randomly varies direction in proportions that make the goalkeeper indifferent, and vice versa. This applies to business too. Retailers randomly running sales, police randomly placing speed traps, and auditors randomly checking compliance. The practical lesson: in simultaneous games, think about what others will do given what they think you'll do. Find the Nash equilibrium, where everyone is playing their best response. If it's a bad equilibrium for you, look for ways to coordinate, commit, or change the game structure itself. Sequential games and backward induction. Sequential games involve players moving one at a time, with later players observing earlier moves before making their decisions. Chess, business entry decisions, legal negotiations, and many everyday situations follow this structure. The key strategic tool for sequential games is backward induction, looking forward to the end of the game, then reasoning backward to decide your first move. Consider the game of chess. A novice thinks 1 or 2 moves ahead. A master thinks 10 or 20 moves ahead, envisioning how the game will unfold and working backward to determine the best move now. This is backward induction. You don't just think about immediate consequences, but about the entire sequence of moves and countermoves leading to the final outcome. Dixit and Nalebuff illustrate with a business example. You're considering entering a market currently dominated by an incumbent company. If you enter, they can either accommodate you by accepting reduced market share or fight by slashing prices to drive you out. Fighting is costly for both of you. They lose profits from low prices and you lose your entry investment. Accommodation leaves both moderately profitable. The naive analysis: you fear they'll fight, so you don't enter, but backward induction reveals the truth. If you enter, what's their best response? Fighting is costly. They lose more by fighting than by accommodating. So rationally, they'll accommodate. Knowing this, you should enter. The key is that the threat to fight isn't credible. It's not in their interest to carry it out. By reasoning backward, you see through the empty threat. This pattern appears constantly. An employee threatens to quit if they don't get a raise. Is the threat credible? If the company calls their bluff, will they really quit? If not, the threat is empty. A parent threatens punishment if a child misbehaves. Is the threat credible? If the child tests it, will the parent follow through? Children quickly learn which threats are credible. The authors explain that in sequential games, only credible threats and promises matter. A threat is credible only if carrying it out is in your interest when the time comes. A promise is credible only if keeping it is in your interest when the time comes. Empty threats and promises are ignored by strategic thinkers who use backward induction. This creates the commitment problem. Often you want to make threats or promises that aren't inherently credible. The solution is to change the game structure to make them credible through commitment devices. The incumbent company, wanting to credibly threaten fighting, could publicly invest in extra capacity. That's only valuable if they maintain high market share. Now fighting is credible because they've committed resources that would be wasted otherwise. A related concept is first mover advantage. In sequential games, moving first can be advantageous because you force later players to respond to your move rather than the other way around. Companies rush to launch products first, politicians announce positions early, and businesses race to grab prime locations, all seeking first mover advantage. But first mover advantage isn't automatic. Sometimes second mover advantage exists, letting others make mistakes first, observing what works, and then entering with an improved version. Microsoft famously followed this strategy, rarely innovating first, but excelling at copying and improving others' innovations. The practical lesson: in sequential games, use backward induction, look forward to the end, figure out what rational players will do at each decision point, and work backward to determine your optimal first move. Pay attention only to credible threats and promises. Look for ways to commit yourself to make your own threats and promises credible. and decide whether first mover or second mover advantage applies to your specific situation. Strategic moves, threats, promises, and commitments. Strategic moves are actions taken now to influence what others will do later. The three main types are threats, promises, and commitments. Understanding how to make and respond to strategic moves is essential for success in business, negotiation, and life. A threat says, if you do X, I'll do Y. That hurts both of us. The goal is to prevent X by making the threat credible. The commitment problem is that when push comes to shove, carrying out the threat hurts you too, so why would you? The solution is commitment. Taking actions that make carrying out the threat your best option if the other party does X. Dixit and Nalebuff provide the classic example of Cortez burning his ships after arriving in Mexico. His soldiers were considering retreat in the face of overwhelming odds. By burning the ships, Cortez eliminated retreat as an option, committing to fighting. This commitment changed the soldiers' strategic calculations. Knowing retreat was impossible, they fought desperately and won. Without the commitment, the threat, "we'll fight to the death," wasn't credible. With the commitment, it became credible. In business, commitment devices include contracts with penalties, investments in specific assets, public statements that create reputational costs for backing down, and organizational structures that remove flexibility. A company committing to low prices might adopt cost structures that make higher prices impossible. Now, their threat to match competitors' low prices is credible because they physically can't maintain high prices. A promise says, if you do X, I'll do Y that benefits you. The goal is to incentivize X by making the promise credible. The same commitment problem applies. When the time comes, keeping the promise might not be in your interest. So, why should anyone believe you? The solution is similar: commitment devices that make keeping the promise your best option. Warranties are commitment devices for promises. A company promising quality could just say, "Trust us," but that's not credible. Offering a warranty that costs them money if quality is poor makes the promise credible. They've committed to quality by making poor quality expensive for themselves. Employment contracts with severance requirements serve as commitment devices. An employer promising job security without a contract has an incentive to fire employees when convenient. A contract with costly severance makes the promise credible by making firing expensive. The authors distinguish between conditional commitments, threats, and promises that depend on others' actions, and unconditional commitments, reducing your own options regardless of what others do. Cortez burning ships was an unconditional commitment. He couldn't retreat regardless of what happened. This is powerful, but risky. You're betting everything on a specific outcome. Strategic use of commitments requires understanding when to limit your own flexibility. In negotiation, having less flexibility can be advantageous. If you can credibly claim, "My hands are tied, I literally cannot offer more," you have negotiating power. The buyer who says, "I only have $10,000 budget, I physically cannot spend more," has power if credible. Your lack of options becomes the other party's problem. This explains why negotiators sometimes feign constraints. "My boss won't let me. Company policy prevents me. My spouse would kill me." These claims, if credible, shift responsibility for impasse from you to your constraints. The counterplay is to question credibility and offer creative solutions that work within claimed constraints. The authors show how brinkmanship exploits commitment. You create a situation where there's a chance of disaster for both parties, then credibly commit to not backing down. This forces the other party to back down to avoid catastrophe. Nuclear brinkmanship during the Cold War followed this logic, both sides creating risk of mutual destruction to force the other to concede in various conflicts. In everyday life, you see strategic moves constantly. Parents threatening punishment, companies promising rewards for loyalty, politicians making campaign promises, couples negotiating responsibilities. The question is always, is this threat or promise credible? What commitment devices exist? Should I believe them or call the bluff? Bargaining and negotiation. Bargaining situations involve two or more parties trying to agree on a division of value with conflict if they can't agree. Understanding bargaining theory helps you negotiate better outcomes in salary discussions, business deals, purchasing, and relationship conflicts. The fundamental bargaining problem is dividing a pie between parties. If they agree, they split the pie according to the agreement. If they disagree, both get nothing or some default disagreement pay off. The strategic question, how should the pie be divided? Nash's bargaining solution suggests that the division should split the surplus equally above each party's disagreement point. If you'll get $10,000 if no deal is reached, your disagreement payoff, and the other party gets $5,000, their disagreement payoff, and the deal creates $30,000 total value. The surplus above disagreement is $30,000, $15,000, $15,000. This splits $7,500 each, giving you $1,700 and them $2,500. This provides the strategic insight. Improving your disagreement point increases your share. If you have a better alternative to the deal, you capture more of the surplus. This is why having a competing job offer improves your salary negotiation. It raises your disagreement point. It's why having multiple potential buyers improves your sale price. The better your alternative, the more you can demand. The authors explain the importance of BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Your BATNA determines your reservation price, the minimum if selling or maximum if buying acceptable deal. If you can't negotiate above your BATNA, you walk away. Improving your BATNA before negotiating dramatically increases your power. They also discuss the power of commitment in bargaining. If you can credibly commit to a position, you force the other party to either accept or walk away. The buyer who credibly commits to a maximum price forces the seller to accept that price or get nothing. The labor union that credibly commits to strike, unless certain demands are met, forces management to meet those demands or lose production. The challenge is making commitments credible in bargaining. Simply stating a position isn't enough. You need costly actions that make backing down painful. Public statements that would embarrass you if you conceded, contracts with third parties that penalize you for accepting less, or destroying flexibility that would allow you to concede. These make commitments credible. Dixit and Nalebuff examine the role of information in bargaining. If both parties know the total value created by the deal, they negotiate openly about division. But usually one or both parties have private information. A buyer doesn't know the seller's minimum price. A seller doesn't know the buyer's maximum price. Employers don't know workers' true alternative offers. This information asymmetry creates strategic posturing. Each party exaggerates their position to capture more surplus. Buyers claim low willingness to pay. Sellers claim high alternatives. Workers exaggerate outside offers. The game becomes about revealing and concealing information strategically. The authors show how ultimatum game experiments reveal that fairness concerns affect bargaining in practice, even when pure logic suggests otherwise. In the ultimatum game, one player proposes a division of money and the other accepts or rejects. If rejected, both get nothing. Logically, the proposer should offer $1 and keep $99, and the responder should accept because $1 is better than $0. But in reality, people reject unfair offers, punishing greed even at cost to themselves. This means strategic bargainers must consider fairness and emotions, not just cold logic. Offering too little risks rejection even when acceptance would be rational. The savvy bargainer finds the balance between capturing value and maintaining the relationship that allows the deal to close. The authors also address multi-party bargaining. When more than two parties negotiate, coalitions form. The strategic question becomes, who can form a winning coalition, and how will coalition members split the gains? This applies to corporate board negotiations, political coalition building, and even deciding where a group of friends will eat dinner. The practical lessons. Improve your bhatna before negotiating to increase your power. Make credible commitments to advantageous positions when possible. Strategically reveal and conceal information to shape the other party's perception. Consider fairness and relationships, not just maximum value extraction. In multi-party settings, think about coalitions and how to be part of the winning coalition. Voting, cooperation, and collective action. Many strategic situations involve groups making collective decisions or attempting cooperation. Voting systems, team projects, public goods provision, and environmental protection all face unique strategic challenges. Understanding these helps you navigate organizational politics, committee decisions, and social dilemmas. Voting seems straightforward. Everyone casts their vote, and the majority wins. But strategic voting is more complex. The problem is that voting systems can produce strange outcomes depending on how votes are aggregated. Arrow's impossibility theorem proves that no voting system can satisfy all desirable properties simultaneously. Every system has some flaw. Consider the problem of strategic voting. Sometimes your sincere preference isn't your strategic vote. In a three-candidate race where your favorite has no chance, voting for them might help elect your least favorite by splitting the vote. Strategically, you should vote for your second choice, who can actually win. This happens constantly in primary elections and multi-candidate races. The median voter theorem explains much of political positioning. In two-candidate elections, both candidates rationally position themselves near the median voter's preferences. The candidate left of median loses to one who moves slightly right, toward median. Both converge toward center, which is why political parties often seem similar. They're both chasing the median voter. This applies beyond politics. When a company board makes decisions by majority vote, the median director's preferences often determine outcomes. Knowing this, you can predict decisions by identifying the median player rather than analyzing everyone's preferences. Dixit and Nalebuff also explore the tragedy of the commons, situations where individuals acting in their self-interest collectively create bad outcomes. The classic example: sheep herders sharing common grazing land. Each herder benefits by adding more sheep, but if all do, they overgraze and destroy the commons, hurting everyone. Individually rational behavior leads to collective disaster. This pattern explains overfishing, pollution, traffic congestion, and many workplace problems. Everyone taking long breaks hurts team productivity. Everyone seeing everyone on emails creates inbox overload. Each action is rational individually, but collectively destructive. The challenge is creating cooperation when individual incentives point toward defection. The authors identify several solutions. Repeated games. When you interact repeatedly, cooperation becomes rational, because defection triggers punishment in future rounds. The tit-for-tat strategy: cooperate initially, then do whatever the other party did last time, can sustain cooperation in repeated prisoners' dilemmas. Reputation. In communities where reputation matters, defecting damages your reputation and causes others to stop cooperating with you. This makes cooperation rational, even in one-shot games, if future interactions with others depend on your reputation. Institutions. Creating rules, monitoring, and punishment for defection can sustain cooperation. HOAs, environmental regulations, workplace policies, all attempt to solve collective action problems through institutional structure. Changing payoffs. If you can change incentives so cooperation becomes individually rational, the problem dissolves. Aligning individual and collective interest through bonuses, penalties, or ownership structures. The authors explain the free rider problem. In public goods provision, individuals benefit from the good whether they contribute or not, creating incentive to free ride on others' contributions. Public radio, open source software, environmental protection, all face free rider problems, where everyone hopes others will contribute while they enjoy benefits for free. Solutions include excludability, making the good unavailable to non-contributors; social pressure, bundling public goods with private benefits; or government provision funded by mandatory taxes. Each solution has costs, so the challenge is choosing the most efficient way to provide necessary public goods despite free rider incentives. In organizational settings, these concepts explain committee dynamics. Why do committees often make mediocre decisions? Median voter theorem suggests they gravitate toward centrist safe choices. Why do team projects have slackers? Free rider problem. Individual contributions are hard to monitor, so some coast on others' work. Understanding these patterns helps you design better decision-making processes and incentive structures. Competitive strategy in business. Business competition is fundamentally strategic. Your success depends not just on your choices, but on anticipating and responding to competitors' moves. Dixit and Nalebuff apply game theory to illuminate competitive business strategy. The core question in competitive strategy: should you compete or cooperate with rivals? The prisoner's dilemma logic suggests that competition dominates cooperation. Even when cooperation would benefit everyone, competitive pressures push toward mutually harmful outcomes. Price wars, advertising arms races, and overinvestment in capacity all reflect this dynamic. The authors explain how first-mover advantage works in business. The company that enters a market first or launches a product first can often establish brand recognition, secure distribution channels, and achieve economies of scale that create barriers for later entrants. Amazon in e-commerce, Google in search, Facebook in social networks, All benefited from first-mover advantages. But first-mover advantage requires commitment. You must invest heavily enough that your presence credibly deters entry. Half-hearted first-moving invites competition. The strategic principle: if you move first, go big to make it unprofitable for others to follow. If you're not willing to commit fully, sometimes being a fast second mover is better. Let pioneers make expensive mistakes and enter with an improved version. They discuss credible entry deterrence. An incumbent firm might want to deter entry by threatening aggressive price competition if anyone enters. But this threat is only credible if carrying it out is rational. If fighting is more costly than accommodating entry, the threat is empty. The solution is commitment. Invest in capacity or structure that makes fighting the rational response to entry. The authors show how this explains seemingly irrational overinvestment. Why do companies build more capacity than they need? Partly to credibly commit to fighting entry. The excess capacity signals they'll flood the market with production if anyone enters, making entry unprofitable. The overinvestment serves as a credible deterrence device. They examine strategic complements versus strategic substitutes in competition. Strategic substitutes are situations where if your competitor does more of something, you rationally do less. Pricing is often a strategic substitute. If they cut prices, you might raise yours to focus on a different market segment rather than matching. Strategic complements are situations where if your competitor does more of something, you rationally do more too. Advertising can be a strategic complement. If they advertise heavily, you must advertise heavily to maintain share, leading to mutually escalating advertising spending. Understanding whether actions are complements or substitutes tells you how competition will unfold. Substitutes lead to differentiation. Companies move in opposite directions. Complements lead to arms races. Companies escalate together. Strategic business decisions should recognize which dynamic applies. The authors also explore signaling in competitive markets. Companies with private information about their costs, quality, or intentions can benefit by credibly signaling this information to competitors. A low-cost producer benefits from credibly signaling low costs to deter entry. A high-quality producer benefits from credibly signaling quality to justify premium pricing. The challenge is making signals credible. Anyone can claim low costs or high quality. You need costly signals that only firms with the claimed characteristic would find worthwhile to send. High advertising spending signals high quality because only firms confident in repeat customers can recoup advertising costs. Warranties signal quality because only reliable products make warranties profitable. They explain how reputation serves as a strategic asset in repeated competition. The firm with a reputation for aggressive competition doesn't need to fight. Competitors avoid them anticipating the fight. The firm with a reputation for quality can charge premiums without constantly proving quality. Building and maintaining strategic reputations requires short-term sacrifices for long-term gain. Finally, they discuss how industry structure affects competitive dynamics. In concentrated industries with few competitors, tacit collusion becomes possible. Firms learn to coordinate without explicit communication, sustaining higher prices and profits. In fragmented industries with many competitors, competition is intense and profits thin. Strategic firms analyze industry structure and position themselves accordingly. Auctions and bidding strategy. Auctions are fascinating strategic environments where game theory provides powerful insights. Whether bidding on art, competing for contracts, or participating in online auctions, understanding auction theory dramatically improves your outcomes. Dixit and Nalebuff explain the four main auction types. English auctions are ascending price, where bidders openly compete until only one remains. Dutch auctions are descending price, where the auctioneer lowers price until someone accepts. First price sealed bid auctions have bidders submit secret bids simultaneously, with highest bidder winning and paying their bid. Second price sealed bid auctions have highest bidder winning, but paying only the second highest bid. Each auction type creates different strategic incentives. In English auctions, the optimal strategy is straightforward. Bid up to your valuation and stop. You never pay more than your value, and you win whenever your valuation exceeds all others. The challenge is avoiding emotional escalation where ego leads to bidding beyond value. Dutch auctions are strategically equivalent to first price sealed bid auctions. Both require you to trade off winning probability against price paid. Bid high and win more often, but pay more. Bid low and win less often, but pay less. The optimal bid balances these trade-offs based on your beliefs about competitors' valuations. Second price auctions have a remarkable property. Bidding your true valuation is optimal regardless of others' bids. Bidding more than your value risks winning and paying more than it's worth. Bidding less than your value only reduces your chances of winning without affecting what you pay. This makes second price auctions theoretically attractive. They elicit truthful bids without strategic shading. The winner's curse is a critical concept in auction bidding. In common value auctions, where the object has the same but uncertain value to everyone, like oil drilling rights, the winner tends to be the bidder who most overestimated the value. If 10 companies bid on drilling rights, the winner is likely the one with the most optimistic geologist. On average, winners overpay, the winner's curse. Strategic bidders account for the winner's curse by shading their bids below their estimates. The more bidders competing, the more severe the curse, and the more you should shade. This explains why experienced bidders often seem conservative. They're protecting against the winner's curse. The authors show how auction design affects seller revenue. The revenue equivalence theorem proves that under certain conditions, all four auction types generate the same expected revenue for the seller. But in practice, details matter enormously. The seller's optimal design depends on what information bidders have, whether values are private or common, and how many bidders participate. One key insight: attracting more bidders dramatically increases seller revenue. Competition drives prices toward true value. This is why eBay works. Massive participation creates fierce competition that benefits sellers. Strategic sellers focus on maximizing participation through low reserve prices, attractive presentation, and broad marketing. They discuss the strategic use of reserve prices, minimum prices, below which the seller won't sell. Setting reserves too high discourages bidding and risks no sale. Setting reserves too low might yield unfairly low prices. The optimal reserve balances these concerns, typically set above the seller's value, but below the expected winning bid. The authors explain collusion in auctions and how to prevent it. When bidders collude, they suppress competition and pay less. The classic scheme: Bidders agree not to compete, letting one win cheaply, then privately compensating others. This obviously hurts sellers. Defenses include secret reserve prices, attracting outside bidders who aren't part of the collusion ring, and auction rules that make collusion difficult to sustain. They show how auctions apply beyond traditional settings. Competition for employees is an auction where companies bid salaries. Competition for customers is a reverse auction where companies bid prices. Competing for investors is an auction where entrepreneurs bid equity. Understanding auction dynamics helps you in all these contexts. For bidders, the practical lessons. In English auctions, bid to your value and avoid emotional escalation. In first price auctions, shade your bid below your value, with more shading when more competitors exist. Always account for the winner's curse in common value settings. Research competitors and their likely valuations to inform your strategy. And set strict limits to avoid paying more than something is worth to you. For sellers, the practical lessons. Maximize bidder participation to drive competition. Use auction format appropriate to your situation. English auctions for visible competition excitement. Sealed bid for discretion. Set reserve prices carefully. Design rules to prevent collusion. And provide information that reduces uncertainty, which increases bidding confidence and typically increases price. Everyday strategic thinking. Dixit and Nalebuff conclude by showing how strategic thinking applies to everyday social situations beyond formal business and economic contexts. Recognizing the strategic structure of common situations improves your decision-making in relationships, parenting, and social life. Consider the dinner check problem. You're out with friends, and the check arrives. How should you split it? Everyone paying separately is fair but awkward. Splitting evenly is convenient, but creates a tragedy of the commons. Each person benefits from ordering expensive items while costs are shared, leading everyone to overspend. One person treating avoids the problem but isn't sustainable. The strategic structure creates tension between fairness, convenience, and efficiency. The author suggests the optimal strategy depends on whether this is a repeated or one-shot game. In repeated games with the same group, the threat of retaliation sustains cooperation. Order expensively today, and others will exclude you tomorrow, or order expensively next time. In one-shot games with strangers, the commons tragedy is harder to escape without explicit coordination beforehand. They examine the strategic problem of gift giving. Why give gifts when cash is more flexible and efficient? Game theory suggests gifts serve as costly signals of care and relationship investment. You must expend effort understanding the recipient's preferences to choose well, proving you pay attention and care. Cash requires no such effort and thus signals less. This explains why gift cards are less valued than equivalent cash. They demonstrate less effort. It explains why expensive but poorly chosen gifts fall flat. The cost is visible, but the understanding is not. Strategic gift giving requires balancing thoughtfulness with value, with thoughtfulness often mattering more. Dating and relationship formation are deeply strategic. Both parties have private information about their interest level, quality as a partner, and alternatives. Each tries to signal desirability while assessing the other's signals. Playing too hard to get risks losing interest. Appearing too available signals low alternatives. The strategic balance creates the familiar dance of dating. Each party managing signals to attract while not appearing desperate. The authors explain how commitment solves the hold-up problem in relationships. Without commitment, partners underinvest in relationship-specific capital, moving for the other's job, supporting their career, having children together. Each fears the other will leave after they've invested, leaving them vulnerable. Marriage and other commitment mechanisms solve this by making exit costly, encouraging mutual investment. They discuss parenting strategy. Children strategically test boundaries to discover where lines really are. Empty threats teach children to ignore all threats. Consistent follow-through on stated consequences teaches children that threats are credible, reducing actual need for punishment. The strategic parent commits to consistent discipline, which paradoxically reduces how much discipline is needed. Social coordination games appear constantly. Which restaurant to go to, what movie to watch, when to meet. These involve multiple people with different preferences trying to coordinate. Often it matters less what you choose than that everyone coordinates on something. The strategic challenge is reaching agreement efficiently without wasting time debating. Established coordination mechanisms solve this. Social hierarchies, turn-taking, tradition, or random selection. The friend group that always lets one person decide avoids prolonged debate. The couple that alternates choosing restaurants creates fairness. The family that always does X for holidays avoids annual negotiation. The authors explain costly signaling in social status competition. Why do people buy luxury goods, attend expensive schools, or engage in conspicuous consumption? These serve as signals of status and resources. The signal works only because it's costly. If anyone could fake it cheaply, it wouldn't signal anything. This explains why fashion cycles exist. Once something becomes affordable to everyone, elites abandon it for new expensive signals. They discuss strategic networking. Your network value depends on Metcalfe's law. Value increases with the square of connections. But attention is limited, so you can't maintain infinite connections. Strategic networking balances breadth, many weak connections accessing diverse opportunities, and depth, few strong connections providing reliable support. The authors show how reputation serves as a strategic asset in social life, just as in business. Your reputation for reliability, fairness, discretion, or any valued trait affects how others interact with you. Building strategic reputation requires short-term sacrifices, keeping commitments even when inconvenient, maintaining confidences even when gossiping would be fun. The long-term benefits of strong reputation far exceed short-term costs. Thinking Strategically by Dixit and Nalebuff reveals that strategic thinking isn't just for business executives or military generals. It's a framework for understanding and succeeding in any situation where your outcomes depend on others' decisions. Game theory provides the mathematical foundation, but the insights translate directly to practical wisdom about how to navigate a world of competing interests. Let's recap the essential principles of strategic thinking. In simultaneous games where everyone chooses without knowing others' choices, look for Nash equilibrium, the stable point where no one benefits from changing only their strategy. Recognize prisoners' dilemmas where individual rationality leads to collectively bad outcomes, and look for coordination mechanisms to escape them. Use mixed strategies when facing opponents who would exploit predictable patterns. In sequential games where players move one at a time, Use backward induction. Look forward to the end game. Figure out what rational players will do at each decision point. Then work backward to determine your optimal first move. Recognize that only credible threats and promises matter, and work to make your own commitments credible through costly signals and commitment devices. Understand when first mover advantage applies versus when waiting and learning is superior. Strategic moves, threats, promises, and commitments require careful execution. Threats work only when carrying them out is in your interest. So find commitment devices that make your threats credible. Promises work only when keeping them is in your interest. So use warranties, contracts, and other mechanisms to make your promises believable. And sometimes strategically limiting your own flexibility gives you negotiating power by making certain demands literally impossible for you to accept. In bargaining and negotiation, improve your BATNA before negotiating to strengthen your position. Make credible commitments to advantageous positions when possible. Manage information strategically, revealing facts that strengthen your position while concealing facts that weaken it. Balance value extraction with fairness and relationship maintenance. In multi-party negotiations, think about coalitions and position yourself to be part of the winning coalition. In group decisions and collective action problems, understand the median voter theorem that pulls decisions toward the center. Recognize tragedies of the commons where individual incentives produce collectively bad outcomes, and design institutions, incentives, or social norms that sustain cooperation. Address free rider problems through excludability, social pressure, bundling, or mandatory contribution. In repeated interactions, leverage reputation and the shadow of future to sustain cooperation. In business competition, decide whether to compete or cooperate based on whether actions are strategic substitutes or complements. If moving first, commit heavily enough to make your position credible and entry unprofitable for competitors. Use signals strategically to communicate private information about costs, quality, or intentions to rivals. Build reputation as a strategic asset that shapes competitors' expectations and responses. Analyze industry structure to understand how concentrated or fragmented markets affect competitive dynamics. In auctions and bidding situations, adjust your strategy based on auction format. In English auctions, bid to your value. In first price sealed bid auctions, shade your bid below your value, with more shading when facing more competitors. Always account for the winner's curse in common value settings by reducing bids to avoid overconfidence. As a seller, maximize participation to drive competition and revenue, and use auction design strategically to achieve your goals. In everyday social situations, recognize strategic structure even in casual interactions. Understand that gift-giving signals relationship investment through costly effort. Dating involves strategic signaling of interest and quality while managing perceived availability. Parenting requires credible commitments to stated consequences to maintain authority without constant punishment. Social coordination benefits from established mechanisms that avoid endless debate. Status competition involves costly signaling that maintains separation between groups. The fundamental insight of strategic thinking is that you must think not just about what you want, but about what others want, what they think you'll do, what you should do, given what they'll do in response, and so on. This is looking forward and reasoning backward, envisioning how the game will unfold, and working backward to determine your current move. Most people don't think this way, which is why they're consistently outmaneuvered by those who do. Strategic thinking doesn't mean being manipulative or deceptive. It means understanding reality accurately, recognizing that others have their own interests and will act strategically to pursue them. You can't opt out of strategic situations by refusing to think strategically. You can only ensure you lose them. The person who understands the game has an enormous advantage over the person who doesn't even realize they're playing. This framework transforms how you see the world. You start recognizing Nash equilibria in business competition, commitment problems in negotiations, coordination games in social situations, and information asymmetries in every interaction. You see the difference between credible and empty threats. You understand why certain strategic moves work and others fail. You anticipate others' responses rather than being surprised by them. The applications are endless. Negotiating salary. You improve your BATNA with competing offers, commit to a minimum acceptable offer, and strategically reveal information about your value. Competing in business, you analyze whether to move first or second, whether actions are complements or substitutes, and how to credibly deter entry or competition. In relationships, you recognize commitment problems and design mechanisms that align incentives. In social situations, you understand signaling, reputation, and coordination challenges. Start applying these concepts today. In your next negotiation, consciously improve your BATNA before beginning. In your next competitive situation, use backward induction to anticipate opponents' moves. In your next group decision, recognize the median voter dynamic and position accordingly. In your next conflict, distinguish between credible and empty threats rather than reacting to all threats equally. The more you practice strategic thinking, the more natural it becomes. You'll start automatically asking, what will they do in response? And how can I credibly commit to this? And what's the Nash equilibrium here? These questions reveal strategic structure that others miss, giving you an enormous advantage in achieving your goals. Remember that strategic thinking is most powerful when combined with integrity. Understanding how to manipulate doesn't mean you should manipulate. Understanding how to exploit information, asymmetries, doesn't mean you should deceive. The most effective long-term strategy in repeated games is building a reputation for fairness and reliability, which creates trust that enables cooperation and mutually beneficial outcomes. The world is full of strategic games. Some are zero-sum where one person's gain is another's loss, but many are positive-sum where cooperation creates value for everyone. Strategic thinking helps you recognize which type of game you're playing and adjust your strategy accordingly. In zero-sum games, you compete ruthlessly within the rules. In positive-sum games, you find ways to expand the pie before negotiating how to divide it. Your competitive advantage comes not from physical strength or even intelligence, but from understanding strategic structure that others miss. When everyone else is reacting emotionally or making decisions based only on their own preferences, you're thinking several moves ahead, anticipating responses, and positioning yourself optimally. This is the power of thinking strategically. The game is already being played whether you realize it or not. Every negotiation, every competition, every interaction involving multiple people with different interests is a strategic game. The only question is whether you'll play consciously and strategically, or unconsciously and reactively. The conscious strategic player has an enormous advantage. You now have the framework. You understand Nash equilibrium, backward induction, credible commitments, bargaining dynamics, collective action problems, competitive strategy, auction theory, and everyday strategic situations. You know to think not just about what you want, but about what others will do in response. You know to look forward and reason backward. You know to distinguish between credible and empty threats. You know when first mover advantage applies and when waiting is better. The question is, will you use it? The next time you face a strategic situation, and you face them constantly, will you recognize the game structure? Will you use backward induction? Will you think about credible commitments? Will you look for Nash equilibrium? Will you improve your BATNA before negotiating? Will you think strategically? Your outcomes in business, relationships, and life depend largely on how well you navigate strategic situations. The person who thinks strategically consistently outperforms the person who doesn't, often without working harder or being smarter. They just understand the game better. Start thinking strategically today. The game is on. Make your move.